3, 2, and 1. Mr. Speaker, just because competition exists doesn't mean we should prioritize it. As what Joseph said, even if competition does happen, we would prefer that the entire narrative surrounding how art is made, how art is talked about, and how art is experienced be something that lacks that particular aspect of competition. What we tell you in opening government is that art as a medium, as a practice, as a hobby, as a profession, ought to be celebrated and ought to be something that can be accessible to every single person. The reason as to why opposition loses opening half is that even if a vast majority of their claims are proven to be true, we think they just box out more people from actually opting in art in the first place. You might be asking to yourself, what exactly is the problem in this debate? And that's a good question. The problem in status quo is twofold. Firstly, people are less inclined to get into art because they see it as a comparison between good shit and shit that I made, bad shit. Like, I really want to hammer this point in, is that even if art opens up for better art, as what opposition claims, it also closes the door inherently for people who actually want to try to get in. This is true because we inherently think that people like Vincent van Gogh, that people like Leonardo da Vinci are all like super super-cool people at art, and we can never be able to actually go to the rise of that particular artist. That's why this competition is such a problem. And secondly, there are now more people in status quo who are in art for all of the wrong reasons, i.e. monetary incentive mostly. What we in OG want is to break that chain, to break that narrative that this competition provides to everyone. And in doing so, just makes it better for the average person to opt into art. Two things in my speech: why being able to do art is just a lot more fulfilling on our side, and secondly, why inherently the opposition case is outweighed. Firstly, before all of that, some rebuttals. 1. LO gave us an assertion about how the audience is the root cause for competition. We think that yes, to an extent, there may be pressure, but we would rather not have that, right? The problem when you put the artist at the mercy of the fans and the critics is when that artist becomes a sellout and becomes a slave to societal norms and specific standards. They're not making art for their own particular purpose anymore. Secondly, even if competition is healthy and pushes innovation, the same impact is there, wherein the artist becomes forced to genuflect to popular ideologies and popular culture. This is why we have such a strong skew and proliferation of far progressive liberal values with wokeism. This actually reinforces more echo chambers, wherein those who have the money and capacity being able to dictate what is essentially good art and what is essentially bad art. Thirdly and lastly, the competition argument of LO is outcome dependent on you being able to actually compete and being able to actually have your work recognized. But Joseph already told you how this is largely skewed to the political elites and the people who are rich, who often rule all of these galleries and all of these museums. Yes, competition exists, but it's really just destructive in nature, especially when you have hierarchies that form. Even if this were purely meritocratic and perfect, we need to understand that art is a social construct. What makes Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel better than Joseph, who is constrained by his own capacities, right? Side opposition doesn't acknowledge that the ability to generate, create, and sell art are largely skewed to things outside of our control, which really is just a fucking disgrace. Extension number 1. Why the average person can experience art to its fullest potential and why it's just a lot more fulfilling on our side. What does this look like, right? As what my partner said, we automatically bite the bullet and say, yes, it will probably lead to less commercialization and less monetary incentive on our side. But even with that particular piece of context, we still think that the proliferation of art will still continue to do so, or will still continue to happen. Why? Because things like YouTube still exist in order for the creator as a whole to continue to be monetized, or at least to continue to be supported by their work. The important nuance that happens here is that instead of it being seen under the lens of competition, it is instead seen as in the lens of particularly self-expression or being able to create what you want to create. Why is this likely to happen? The reason as to why status quo is not what we are talking about is precisely because of art's competitive aspect. What we tell you is because the competition of art exists, it creates this burden of expectation for you to create good art. And by good art, that largely translates to art that can be monetized, that can be something you can sell, that can be something that is like inherently created for the majority. This is bad insofar as it minimizes what art can be. As to what my partner said, we say that art is purely subjective, a purely subjective experience, and being able to appreciate art ought not to be put in this competitive aspect or in this competitive narrative that exists within status quo. What impacts will this likely manifest in? Firstly, I think people are just going to be less judged by other people based on the type of art that they actually consume. Let's be comparative, right? The difference in our world is that inherently, in their world, people are just more likely to judge based on these specific or arbitrary standards. This is seen through things like Rotten Tomatoes, things like IMDb, all of that stuff that inherently creates a bias for and against particular things. And we say that yes, bias does exist in status quo, but what we say is that just because bias exists doesn't mean you have to shit on something that's comparatively seen as bad art as opposed to something that's currently seen as good art. That's the principle that the side opening government is trying to defend. What we tell you is that comparatively speaking, right, this is already implicit way. On our side of the house, people still can do all of these things and art will still continue to proliferate. It's just the difference that when these people consume art or when these people make art, it's actually for the right reason. That's the problem that exists in status quo. Because on their side, when you have this competition aspect and when you allow it to thrive through all of the mechanisms that opposition gave to you, that's precisely the point in which that the average person who might want to try their own art is not able to because of all the fetters, because of all the challenges that exist within status quo. For all of those reasons, we think our side just better prioritizes art for art's sake and art for everyone so that they can enjoy. For all of those reasons, very proud to propose. Thank you.